So what is alcohol in general? Well, strictly speaking, there's only one form of alcohol that humans can drink without suffering a quite unforgiving and instant death, and that is ethanol, with its chemical code of C2H6O. Other forms include isopropanol or methanol, but those are a bit beyond the scope of this channel. We're not going to talk about the more chemical aspects of it all. So, we've gathered here today to actually find some answers to important questions like what kind of base ingredient might one use to produce alcohol, and how does one produce alcohol in the first place? And what are the main categories of alcoholic beverages? Generally speaking, there are two major ways to produce alcoholic beverages: distillation and fermentation. Fermentation is an entirely natural process that happens every day in nature. Think of fruits that fall off a tree. You know that eventually they will start to rot. But something else, something very peculiar happens at the very same time, and that is they will start to ferment and make tiny bits of alcohol. Basically, fermentation eats away the sugar inside the base ingredient. Think of potatoes, vegetables, or grains, and turns it into alcohol. But the yield, the amount of alcohol being produced in a natural way, is not quite enough for an alcoholic beverage. So producers usually add yeast to it. The industrial fermentation process is set up like this. Your raw ingredient is being soaked and crushed into warm water. Warm water because that will help to detach the sugar from the rest of the raw ingredient. The sugar water is henceforthly added to fermentation tanks, where the yeast is added. And immediately the yeast will start to eat the sugar away and turn it into alcohol. This process can go on for another 48 hours or so, after which fermentation is complete. By that stage we get to maturation. Maturation is the final touch of an alcoholic beverage. Examples of a fermented alcoholic beverage would be wine or indeed beer. Second option to produce alcohol is distillation. And the first steps are quite the same as fermentation. But instead of sending the stuff off to maturation after the fermentation process has been completed, distillation actually gets the alcoholic liquid into a still. And in that particular still, the alcoholic stuff is being heated up to 80 degrees centigrade, which is the boiling point of alcohol. The alcohol will evaporate and rise up in the still, where at the end of it, it will go down and be gathered in a tank. Then, the stuff is ready for maturation. Examples of distilled alcoholic beverages would be mezcal, or indeed rum. For bitters, liqueurs, and flavored spirit, there's a final step of production, and it's called maceration. After the fermentation, the distillation, you will have to infuse the distilled spirit once again with raw material. That way you would enhance the taste and the flavor of it. As mentioned before, fermentation is an entirely natural production process. It was already known to our ancestors back in the Stone Age. Over time, people started to define and perfect the way of making alcohol in order to, of course, have some degree of control over the end produce and at the same time guarantee quality. Distillation in its part was discovered by Abu Musa de Shabir, a wise man from an Arab country back in the 800s, who was actually experimenting with a still when he was heating wine. So, how could we divide the different kinds of alcoholic beverages and their production processes? Well, first, this is a tough one though, but first let's look and start out with dividing between fermented and distilled drinks, of course. You can then go on and actually look at the type of raw material being used. Think of fruits or grains or even vegetables, if you will. Then you could even more divide it and look at the exact specific type of raw material being used. Like grains might well be barley, but could also mean corn or rye or wheat. And of course that makes a massive difference when it comes to the final result of it all. Then you can also go on and look at the production process, and you will see that slight variation in those production processes will make for a unique drink. So we have two main categories. We've already discussed that: distilled and fermented drinks. Fermented drinks could well be beer or wine or cider. However, you have two different types of distilled drinks, spirits and liqueurs. Liqueurs are different in that regard because they have a certified amount of sugar to it. Under the law, for instance, a liqueur needs to contain 100 grams a liter. Spirits would be whiskey, rum, cognac, vodka even, while liqueurs might well be fruit liqueurs or cream liqueurs or even herbal liqueurs. So that's it with our run through of all the different categories of alcoholic beverages and its production process as well. I hope you could get some grasp on it all, and I'll see you next time.